I've had a long professional association with issues relating to terrorism. Between 2009 and 2013, I was assigned to New York, and I was India's permanent representative to the United Nations. Just before that, the UN had established the UN Counterterrorism Committee after the 9/11 acts of terrorism. I have a quite simple understanding. An act of terror which has the impact of taking away innocent lives cannot be justified no matter how deep our differences, whether differences are political, social, ideological. And during my chairmanship of the UN Counterterrorism Committee, by the way, earlier the Counterterrorism Committee was only chaired by permanent members of the Security Council, but India was given that unique honor, and I was the first chair of the Counterterrorism Committee. And we established during that, at the annual meeting in 2012, what is called the zero tolerance norm, which means an act of terror, no matter by whom it is committed, whatever be the cause for which they are committing it, it cannot be justified and it needs to be roundly condemned. And I say that with a sense of responsibility, whether the act of terror is 9/11 in the United States or 26/11 in Mumbai, or the Pahalgam massacre on 22nd April when 26 innocent people, some newly married, they were lined up against the wall. Personal details were sought as to which religion they were from, and they were killed. But terror is a crime against humanity, because a terrorist takes away the most fundamental right of all, the right to life. Therefore, when we gathered in this beautiful ceremony, very solemn, on the island of Cork this morning, the sentiment that was expressed not only by the Prime Minister of Ireland, I hope the pronunciation is correct, Taoiseach, okay, or the visiting Minister from Canada, it was a similar sentiment. But I was particularly struck by one of the invitees who spoke, who is the current Canadian permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Ambassador Bob Sear. Not because I used to hold that job for India, but something he said really struck a chord in me. He said that in 2005, when Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister of Canada, and I've had the privilege of knowing Stephen Harper very well, he was mandated to write a report on the 1985 Kanishka bombing. And he said categorically, not to me, but to our ANI correspondent who's also put it out, he said this 1985 bombing, we must realize, was an act of hate. It was a crime. It was a bomb planted in Canada. And then he went on to say there can be no justification. That is much our stand. We in India, because of the nature of our peaceful society, we always expect that there will be a change of heart amongst the people who are perpetrating it. And I think for many decades, we allowed that to happen. Yes, whenever there was an act of terror, there was anger, there was disappointment, but at the end of the day, we allowed a situation to develop where we thought better sense would prevail, and after the horrific consequences of people dying, we again reverted back to business as usual, talks, saying that differences can be resolved. In an interview recently, I described the pre-Modi period of dealing with this as the theater of the absurd. I can remember I was in Sharm el-Sheikh a few years ago. I was then the permanent representative in New York with a very distinguished Indian Prime Minister whom I knew personally, deeply respected. And he was having a bilateral discussion with his counterpart. And he agreed to, expand the dialogue. I found that not only theatrical but absurd. So somebody, a very distinguished colleague of mine recently wrote that, said nice things about me, the way the ambassador was saying nice things about me. And he said, but the politician in Mr. Puri has overtaken the diplomat in Mr. Puri. No, it's not. The diplomat in me remains totally alive because I was born into diplomacy. I spent 39 years in diplomacy as a foreign service officer. I spent 6 years in international think tanking, that's 45, and I've been a minister for 8 years. But the fact is, you cannot respond to terror. कि भाई वो आए, फिर हमने बातचीत की, we got angry, हमने थोड़ी mobilization कर दी, या कुछ एक strike हुई, हमने एक strike कर दी वापस जाके. नहीं, मोदी जी ने, भाई, Modi ji's earlier experience was also dictated by you guys. Those who were dealing with this, and then there were appeasement, and तो वो तो सुधरे नहीं, उन्होंने तो करते गए. कभी 26/11 हो गया, अजमल कसाब, कभी अभी ये पहलगाम में 22 innocent lives are lost. So this time Modi ji has come back and said, listen guys, no trade with terror. This is the new Operation Sindoor template. No talks with terror. That is the second component. And blood and water do not mix. And I think that Sindoor doctrine is beautifully summed up and capped that an act of terror from now on will be viewed as an act of war. In other words, so my colleague who wrote this piece, and trying to say, वो आपने भी ये किया था, सुषमा जी गए थे, PM साहब भी गए थे, अरे किया था हम भी. 1947 के बाद कुछ और लोग थे जिन्होंने देश चलाने की कोशिश की है, उन्होंने किया था. थोड़े दिन हम भी प्रभावित थे, but that was the theater of the absurd. अब नहीं होगा. Now, if there is an act of terror, it will receive a response as an act of war. And I think that is the new India.